Does that make sense? The knowledge of that life. I don't know about everybody else, but it's been a tiring few years, really. There's the odd thing that's gone on, and it's caused all kinds of pressures and stresses and fatigues. It feels like everyone's sick every second week. It feels like, there's just a bunch of stuff going on. But I love it when there's just that sense of cut through, when it feels like what God's doing is bigger than everything else that's happening. As Christians, that's the space that we want to be in, isn't it? Where we see our eyes fixed not on all the things that are going wrong, but just a sense or a gentle, an ear that's sensitive to the whisper of what the Spirit is doing amongst us. And I hope that's the case for you. And I'm just praying and just finding myself drawn into extensive times of prayer down here and at home, and just sitting there, God, what is it that you want to do with us in this season? Because it feels like there's something fresh for us as a church to step into, and I'm really excited about that. When we moved into this part of the building from, our season in the kitchen, as we affectionately know it, and doing multiple services and not being able to gather as the family, and we call it the dining room, but it took on, the kitchen had negative connotations for some of us, meaning in the kitchen. And waiting for this space, which was just meant to be the first space and doesn't solve all our problems, as you can see. We've got people away ministering in other locations. Jamie's away this morning. We've got a crew at a prophetic conference in Christchurch, and so it's like we just don't really fit if we all turned up. And we've got some exciting things happening just as we plan for next steps for next door. We're on the edge of hiring an engineer and an architect to try and help us work through the next steps of the plans there to do something that would be 2.5 times the size of this. And so we can fit in and make room for all the people that haven't yet come to know Jesus yet. Because that's the ones we exist to serve, right? We want to be people who are found, people who are growing, but the first part of our thing is we exist to help lost people get found. And so we knew that when we came in here, it wouldn't just be about having a nicer room to meet in. But there was a sense amongst the leadership here in Timaru that there was a sense of crossing a line as a community. And that would be a sense of, actually, now I'm digressing way off my notes, but I'm feeling stirred to share this, so hopefully it's helpful to give context. But a number of years ago, Steve and Rachel, who pastor our Temuka location, Steve he's on our oversight, he carries kind of the prophetic heart for the life of our church, and he just said, I feel there's a time coming where there's going to be a line drawn in the sand. This was pre the world turning upside down on this particular cycle, and he just said, I feel like there's a line in the sand coming where people are going to have to actually decide. There's going to be an awakening. There's going to be a sense of, am I actually living the life, or am I just going through the motions? We really felt that coming into this space would be the start of that journey. There would be kind of a line in the sand where people, it's not about the building, it's not about the geographical place, it's about something that God is doing. Beyond that, there's this invitation for us to walk with Him in spirit and in truth. And I really believe that we are on that journey. And I just wanted to say that this morning because for some of you who might be around church for a long time and go, yeah, that's great. There's always a new thing coming, especially if you're one of us Pentecostals. Like there's always something happening. God's doing something out of the box. But, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. It's, God is genuinely doing stuff in people's lives and people's hearts and our journey as a congregation. And yeah, it can get overplayed when there's something new every week, but this isn't that thing. This is a sense of genuine invitation, genuine drawing for us to evaluate our lives. And that's not aside from what we're talking about on Sundays. That's actually part of the journey that we are on as a church. And we've been talking about Sabbath over the last 4 weeks. We've been having some great feedback, just people beginning to wrestle with that and look how to integrate that into their practice. And it's easy if you're just perhaps only been to one of our Sundays in the last 4, and you can come into a word like Sabbath or a series like Sabbath and go, man, that just sounds a little legalistic. Aren't you talking about the Spirit moving, and then you want us to kind of fit into rigid practice? And it can seem like this legalistic idea, but we've been exploring the invitation that is Sabbath. It's nothing to do with your salvation. It's nothing to do with what shapes your eternity. But it is about letting your eternity shape your now. It is about letting eternity shape your now. It's the invitation of all of the practices. the practices the church has been engaged with for the most part for a couple of thousand years, these things that they integrate into their world that helps to keep them into the story that they bought into or they believe was revealed to them when they said yes to giving their lives to follow Jesus. That the world is not actually the way the world says it is, but the world is the way that God says it is. That there's a way to live in, to approach, to be in, to navigate through the world that we can do with the eyes or the mind of Christ. That we can interpret the data around us, not as the world tells us to interpret it, but as the Scripture invites us to see it. As the Spirit awakens in our heart the true eyes of faith, to believe that Jesus is who Jesus said he was, and the world is as he says it is. And these practices help anchor us in that story. Sabbath is no different. As I said, we've been exploring, we're a few weeks in. Can everyone see the whiteboard? We're gonna have half the class's worst nightmare. We're gonna have a pop quiz. Half the class's worst nightmare, right? We've got some people that are so energized, like we're going to dominate the church family in this one. And then there's others going, oh no, I didn't study. It's like Sean on the second day of his course. But, sorry, private conversations start, pop quiz. We've been talking about Sabbath. Does anyone... I'll catch up on it later, Schmidt. One of those things you say before completely thinking it through. Here we go. It's a disease that I have. Right. We've talked about 4 different parts of Sabbath, this practice that helps anchor us in the story of God. Does anyone remember what the first one was? Stop. We've got some hand raisers and some non-hand raisers. I feel like it's really unfair. We should set the rules. Yeah, we've had stop. Okay? Stop. What else have we got?
Rest.
Stop and rest. We'll put those on the top. Those are the things that we talk about, the things that we are not going to do. Right? We are going to cease activity and we are going to rest. What are the 2 things that we said we will do on the Sabbath? Delight. You've got to remember the fun one, eh?
Yeah.
That's right. Delight. That moment where you forget how to spell light. Yeah. What's the other one? Kirk, you've been putting your hand up faithfully. So, did you have one? Worship. Worship. The one that you're doing right now, everyone forgot about. Worship. The 4 acts, or the 4 parts of Sabbath: to stop, to cease from our work, to Shabbat in the Hebrew, that just means to stop or to cease from our work. That we are people that are called to not be constantly driven, but to cease and to stop our work. We are those that need to not just work and find fulfillment in 6 days of work, but actually engage our 7th day where we cease from our work. When we stop, do we stop so that all of the voices in our head can tell us about the terrible job we're doing and be riddled with anxiety for 24 hours as we study our lists and the fact that it's not getting completed while we stop? Or are we invited to have a different mindset than the anxiety that drives us most of the time? Right? We're invited to not just stop, but to stop and to rest. So this idea to actually engage the replenishment that is not driven by the anxiety of our modern slavery, this idea that there's always somewhere we should be and something we should always be doing, but that idea that we can actually cease and replug and recharge. And then we are called to delight. So it's not meant to be, it's interesting when you hear people have just been to 1 or 2 of these and I've got questions, and their questions generally relate to the fact that they haven't understood or heard or connected with all 4 of these ideas. And it's like, just Sabbath, just a whole day of praying feels like a really, really big deal. It's like, well, it's not really about that. It's not just taking a whole day to pray for 24 hours so that we are somehow spiritual supermen and women, but rather we're actually invited to delight, to actually nurture the practice of gratitude and joy in our lives, because we live in a world that's always telling us our lives are never enough, we never have enough, we never have enough time, energy, resources to have the good life, but we actually get to stop and reflect on the good life that God has given us. And we get to actively enjoy the things that God's given us, and just not, even that's an interesting comment. Our mind goes to enjoying the things God has given us, because we sometimes think that God's blessing is found in the things that we have accumulated, but actually the invitation primarily for Sabbath is to enjoy the relationships, which is not how we often evaluate our wealth. We look at the things we've been able to accomplish or accumulate rather than the richness of the relationships that we have. But I can tell you, your life will be more indicative of the relationships that you have than the stuff that you've collected. Your joy won't be about collecting more stuff than your neighbour. Your joy will come from genuine relationships that have been nurtured and invested in and treated with gratitude and are treasured. And so we're invited to delight. And then we're invited to worship. Now, it could be said that stopping because God asks you to stop, resting because God asks you to rest, and delighting because God asks you to delight is worship. It is. Obedience is an act of worship. Our whole lives are lives of worship, but this is this idea of, in setting that time aside, that we would actually make sure the main thing is the main thing, so that when we take that day of rest, we would gather as a church family to sing the story of God, to preach the story of God, to pray the story of God together, to actually work out our love one another's inside the family, so that we can go out and take that same posture and attitude to the world that God has called us to reach, to love, and to serve. It's interesting because, as I said, you talk to people, we've had half the conversation, they're like, okay, I can stop and delight and rest, but, you know, we don't necessarily need the worship, or we can worship and be happy for a couple of hours, but I can't afford to stop and I can't afford to rest. This whole practice is designed to help us to not just celebrate the story we believe in, but reflect on where we really don't believe it. I'm going to say that again. It doesn't just invite us into these four things, but it actually invites us to reflect on whether or not we really believe it. Because if we feel like we can't stop because we need to keep the world moving and we need to prove that we're enough by what we can accomplish, or by the lists we can get through, or about the peace that we can bring to ourselves through our own striving and effort, then we've completely missed the point. What a terrible thing if we knew all the what's but forgot the why. The reason I've drawn it like this is because these are the minors. Does anyone know what the major is? Oh, okay. Here we go. Connection. Oh, it's probably a bit cheeky because there's probably a few right answers here. Yeah. The major of Sabbath is the major of our lives. I'm surprised you didn't know the answer to that one, Sean. If in doubt, Jesus. That's how Christianity works. If in doubt, Jesus. I was excited about wrapping up the series this morning. But as I began to read, I thought it'd be great. We've been drawing a lot from the Psalms. We've been talking about these calls to worship, this idea, these invitations that are pictured through the wisdom literature. in the First Testament. But I continually being drawn to Hebrews. Hebrews is the book where we get kind of this beautiful picture of new covenant and how the new covenant works and how the new covenant is mediated. By the way, covenant, you might sound like it sounds like a Christianese word, but if you can understand that even the context of the Bible is the First Testament is the first covenant, and the New Testament is the new covenant. This is literally the paradigm of the Bible. It's the way that the Bible works, is this journey of two covenants. And the book of Hebrews is an incredibly Jewish book. Incredibly Jewish book. You need to kind of really have an in-depth understanding of Hebrew culture, which I don't have. Some books help me with that. Because it's literally based from a very particular worldview, but it's this rich text that tells us just how this actually works. And so I was drawn there because I know this is in the New Testament where you'll find Sabbath primarily is in the Gospels, where you'll see that Jesus and the disciples on a particular Sabbath day go and do a particular Sabbath thing. You get a little bit of pushback when they've picked heads of grain on the Sabbath, and they say, the religious people say, why have you labored and harvested grain on the Sabbath? And Jesus has to have a conversation and say, hey, it's not man for the Sabbath, but Sabbath for the man. And then he'll just put in this little twist in the tail like, by the way, you religious lot, I am Lord of the Sabbath too. Which he's got this kind of, these mysteries that he just keeps dropping and for others to kind of pick up, and those who are hungry when they hear these things decide to walk close with Jesus so that over the journey they can understand, and there's others that find it all just a bit too hard and a bit too complex and go and do their own thing. It's kind of like the Christian journey. Does anyone not understand some stuff about Christianity? Am I in good company this morning? The invitation is always just to walk close with Jesus, and on the journey with him we come to understand. The concern for me when I got to Hebrews after reading, going, I know it's in Hebrews 4, it talks about it, flowing into Hebrews 5, there's this picture of this idea of priesthood and new covenant. And I realised as I was reading through from start, right through about chapter 7, which really looks at the details of the covenant, I was expecting this. I've read it a number of times before, but not after being on this particular journey. And so it's there's beautiful one-liners in Hebrews, incredible stuff. Including the pastor's favourite in Hebrews 9, do not neglect the gathering together and encouraging one another onto good works even more as the day approaches. But these beautiful ideas about him being our great high priest. But what concerned me when I visited it leading into today is it wasn't this waving the flag of victory to the people who were reading it, but it was actually sent, and it seems to read to me, certainly the first half, as a solemn reminder that just knowing the stuff or living in the new covenant time is actually enough. But actually there's a responsibility on us to not just understand, but to engage with the reality that the practice points to. You see, all of the practices point to a story or a reality or a truth much bigger than the sum of its parts. Sabbath has these 4 movements of stop, rest, delight, and worship. And you can do some of them, and they will bring you potentially some mental health improvements. We talked about the Seventh-day Adventists and how they, on average, live 7 years longer than everybody else. That every day, it seems to be this in the modern science, for every day you Sabbath, you get that day back on the end of your life. That's pretty cool, isn't it? It's like they just do. They also have a whole lot of other clean living principles that probably help. But there's a sense we've got to be careful that, of course, that doesn't become legalistic. That's not a judgment call. We've got to work that out for ourselves. But the sense that you can practice some of these things, you can stop and be less anxious. And that is, I'm going to say, 99 times out of 100 going to improve your life and your mental health. If you rest, if you actually just don't go 24/7, there's going to be some improvements to your world. Even coming and actually having a posture of worship or gathering together. Maybe you're someone who has a life that is relatively not social. Maybe you live by yourself, or there's just you and one other in your home, and church becomes this place where you can find friends or have connection or a sense of family. Those things are all going to do wonderful things for you in the natural. You can get all of the natural benefit and still miss the point of what this is actually about. And this is the solemn warning in the book of Hebrews. He talks about the first covenant. He talks about those who were invited to find their Sabbath rest and how they never found it. They never got the generation that was with Moses never entered fully into their rest, into this place where the work of taking the land would be finished and they would live in peace and they would have this taste of what it is to live the good life that God has provided for them. And they never quite made it. And the warning in Hebrews is that we don't make the same mistake, that even though that was just a foretaste, but now that God has moved sovereignly by His Spirit and that Jesus has come and He is now finished the work is completed, and Jesus Himself is our Sabbath rest. That He has actually finished the work. That now we're not those who remember that we were once in slavery in Egypt. That's not our story. It is on a level where we can get enslaved to our own mindsets of drivenness and anxiety and accumulation and accomplishment and all of that stuff. But for us as Christians, the Sabbath becomes this idea of a down payment or a foretaste of the future that Jesus has already secured for us. It's a foretaste. It's a little taster that we get. It's the little sample pot that we get of what it's going to be like. For those of you who like academic language, it's a microcosm. It's this little tiny taste of what will one day fully be realized in its entirety. There will be a new heavens and a new earth because Jesus has finished the work. He didn't rest because He was tired in creation. He rested because He was finished. And we remember, we are those who practice the story, that the work of our redemption and salvation has been secured and finished at the cross. And we engage practices like this to remind us that Jesus is the center of the universe. But we can do these practical things but still miss the point. That Jesus is our destination, that He is the one in whom our hope is placed. Not our own merits to earn anything, but rather we work because of the grace and empowerment of God, and we stop once a week to remember that it's Him who graces us and empowers us to work. It's Him who causes us by His Spirit to will and to work for His good pleasure. And so we stop to rest and reflect in honour of not the benefit that this will help us out with, but in honour of who He is, and that He is in fact the King and the Lord of our lives. Jesus is the point of Sabbath. In Hebrews, my bookmarks disappeared. Don't you love that? I'm just going to give you the highlights of Hebrews 1, God's final word, His Son. These are the subtitles. God's final word, His Son. Number 2, warning to pay attention. Number 3, Jesus greater than Moses. Warning against unbelief. A Sabbath rest for the people of God, because Jesus is our great high priest. In this framework, there's this, and the next one is warning against falling away. There's this idea that we can go with the flow, whether we're in church or wherever we are in the world. We can grab bits of benefit from Jesus and church and being part of the story of God without actually being anchored in the source of truth Himself. This is the warning of Hebrews. It says the people who were released from their slavery, they were people that got so attached to the life they believed that God had given them, that when God actually wanted to walk them into their promised land, they realized their faith had been reduced from them going all out and all in for the God who wanted to release them from their chains of bondage, to now their hope had become in the things that they could touch, taste, feel, and see. God had provided for them richly in the wilderness. Who thinks that's amazing? God had brought water from a rock to sustain them. How awesome is that? God had given them Kmart sandals that never wear out. Like, this is like ultimate lifetime warranty stuff. I know there's some people getting excited now in the room. Some of you just woke up. Sandals that never wear out. Crocs that never wear out. This is what they're given, but they became more attached to the benefits of being God's people than being radically in love and in trust with the one who saved them, called them, and redeemed them. We live in a world where the science is accelerating in some ways, and I'd say in a bit of trouble in other ways. But it's easy for us to just pick bits and go, oh yeah, I'm going to engage with Sabbath because I actually need rest. I'm going to engage with Sabbath because, you know, my wife's always telling me there's another list to do, but now I've got a spiritual reason to stop. There's a lot of negativity in my house. So when the list comes and then the criticisms for not getting the list done, I can remind them that this is a time of delight. That we are not going to be ungrateful people, but we are going to be so excited about what God has blessed us with, including each other. Right? You can do that, and you can get the benefit of it. But if we forget that it's actually about the one who called us, if we forget about it's the one who's actually finished the work, if we forget worship, it's amazing, just even that sense, everyone's like, oh man, you know, I'm not really wanting to shift my lifestyle around what I do on a Sunday, but there's other things that really, really bring benefit to my life. It's like, you know, it becomes an exercise in missing the point. Because we are those whose lives are anchored in this revelation, in this reality. And I don't know if you're aware, but every other thing we do invites us to idolatry. It invites us to put our hope, our trust, and our reliance in all of the things that Sabbath invites us to put down. That when we stop, we realize the world will keep going without us. Even our, whatever it is that we're creating, the workshop we're running, the windows we're glazing. Hey, Callum. The bees. Yeah, the bees. Sorry, I'm just looking at particular people when I know them. So there's all of these things. And there'll be our experiences, the things we do with our times, the way our lives are wired, even the invitations to be distracted are different for all of us, but the fact that we all have invitations to be distracted is the same. This invitation to base our lives around lesser loves than God. Things that by the very nature of sinful nature are counterfeit. That promise us things that only God has, can and will deliver. Say, if you give yourself to me, I will give you rest. By the age of 50, you won't have to work anymore, and your wealth will give you rest. Talk to anyone who's been there. They've gone, we started working again because we realised that those things are only fun. The leisure's only fun when it's on the end of a working life, which actually has meaning and purpose. But there's this constant call in the marketplace. Come on, find your hope in this. Be busy. Just wear it like a badge. Everyone goes, wow, you're so busy. Wow. Amazing, amazing. You must be really productive. And in our culture, that means really important. Wow, you're amazing. And every time we stop, we have to sit there and go, nah, it doesn't matter what I do and how hard I work. I cannot accomplish for myself what God has accomplished for me. When we rest, when we cease from our labour, we realise that we are not trying to finish the work is already finished. That's why we have communion. We're going to take communion. In fact, if our team could just begin to hand that out now, that'd be great. as we reflect on the invitation of Sabbath and how we've responded to it over the last 4 weeks, or whether we've been here to do that, I encourage you to jump on the live stream and have a look. There's been some incredible messages inviting us into these 4 movements of stop, rest, worship and delight. This invitation to align the practices of our lives to the confession of our faith. We just need to be aware that as we've done this, we may have found some tension or some resistance in our lives, which may have revealed where we struggle to actually implement what we say we believe. There's a saying that's been rippling through my mind. Do we actually trust Jesus with our life, or are we just trusting him with our death? Are we trusting God with our lives? Because we don't talk about giving our deaths to Jesus when we come to Jesus. Who would like to give their death to Jesus today? You know, everyone's like, that's a bit down. It feels a bit negative. Isn't the world negative enough without kind of appeals like that? No, we give our lives to Jesus. Because what happens in our death will be determined by where we invested our life. I feel like people are thinking too hard about this. Come on, this is what we do every week. We're a support group that encourages one another on to live the life that we said that we wanted to live when we gave it over to Jesus. But sometimes we can be so rich in information, we can even tap ourselves on the back for learning new things, but unless we move from information to application, we move from revelation to application, we'll never get the transformation that we are seeking. This is the only thing we can give our lives to that will actually deliver on the promise of life and life in abundance. This is what it means to repent and believe, to be prepared to look at every part of our life and say, is it in alignment with what I believe, what I tell people, what I sing, that I claim is true? Am I living a life that reflects that declaration? I believe that's the invitation of the season, guys. It's not about, you can be around church and pick up a lot of information. When I go and preach out, I often tell my story, and as part of telling my story, if I'm just introducing myself to a new group of people, it'll be, hey, my name's Mike, I'm a pastor's kid. I preached my first message at 16 and gave my heart to Jesus at 19. Because that's the church problem. Is that you can be around the information so much that you absorb it, you can even spit it back out to others when they ask. But is it doing its work in us? And I have been to kids' church enough to be able to tell the stories and preach a message. But then I say, well, I knew the story at 16, but at 19 I met the author. And when you meet the author, it changes the way you read the story. Because you know the heart and the intent of the one who wrote it. The invitation of Sabbath is to do some things that will help your mental health and to do all of those things, but ultimately it's an expression of faith that we actually believe that God has done what God says he has done. That we resist all of these other forms of idolatry to find our meaning in our performance, to find our meaning in our accumulation, to find our meaning in the hours that we've clocked this week, but to actually place our true hope in the revelation that God has finished the work in his Son, Jesus Christ. That the rest is ours if we endure. I believe God's stirring the church right across the nation. I've the privilege to see it. My travels, and again with national leaders this week in Wellington for something that God is stirring across the denominations. as we look to go again in church planting around New Zealand. All the press is negative, but there's about 9 movements, national teams represented, engaging on how do we become church planting churches again. What does it look like for us to not hold back because we feel like we're under attack? What does it look like for us to get forward in the mission again? So look forward, what does it look like for us to take ground? And we do that not because we've looked at all of the circumstances and go, oh, this seems like a good idea. Doing it because we believe that God's building his church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And so we have to begin to take actions. We have to begin to take steps that are in alignment with that confession. And say, God has not finished with us yet. God is still moving by his Spirit. God is inviting us out of that apathy into action again. God is inviting us to not just go through the motions, but to examine our own hearts and lives and see if we are living lives that reflect the things that we say that we believe. In Hebrews 4, when they talk about the generation that never entered into their rest, the sad thing was, when it came to living out their faith, they realised they didn't really have one. It's a sombering reality. Remember the spies went out? Go and take the land. The God who freed you from there is going to give you that. Everyone's like, yeah. My crops are still going. It's like, do we really need it? Jesus might have finished the work, but we still have to engage with it. We still have to make sure our hope is in it, that it's not being distracted into something else. That we've not drifted, that we've not learnt too much from our neighbours, which was Israel's problem in the First Testament. Always looking over the fence. Oh, they've got that. Wish we could be like that. And in doing so, they forgot the richness of their own vocation and calling. They were called to live a way to be a light to the world rather than to be constantly living in comparison with their neighbours. They were meant to be the benchmark for their neighbours. May we not be those people. May we be those people who are radically in love with Jesus. Who don't just have our feelings toward him, but have our trust in him. Today, as we take the emblems, we reflect not on all the work that has to be done. This is a moment of remembrance and reflection to remember that the work that truly mattered has been finished. It's Jesus' work. It is finished. No one really understood what he was talking about. But those words echo through history. To our ears today, the work of reconnecting us with God has been completed. Our job is to pick it up and to run with it, to walk with it, to have our ears attuned to His Spirit, to plan and prioritise our lives around the revelation that God has done the work that matters, and He's invited us to both participate the work He is with Him and the work He is now doing, to recreate, to repair, to restore all that He cares for. So, Father, as we come around the table, we remember that there are many benefits to being part of your family. But at the heart of it, without you, we don't get any of it. It's just wishful thinking. There's nothing else that can deliver what you have promised. And we are people who have bet our lives on that promise. So today, we remember that, Lord, our lives are not the sum total of our labours, that the things that we accumulate do not tell us anything about who we are. But we remember that the work that matters, you finish. And that we live in light of that revelation. So help us today to examine our own hearts and to see where we have been distracted. Lord, we don't want to just get the side benefits. We want to be the people that you've called us to be in the world. We thank you that you are our Sabbath rest. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.